Hello, everybody. Tonight I wanted to talk about kind of the process that I've gone through in my study of Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I am not a master, I'm not a black belt, I haven't been doing it my entire life. I'm not coming at it from that perspective, so please bear in mind that I'm coming at this from the position of somebody who's been studying a couple years. This is a topic that I know a lot of people are interested in, and I think that it intersections in a lot of other interesting areas. So I don't want to go too much into tangents here, but I have waited. I've been studying now for 2 years. I wanted to wait till I had really kind of sucked my teeth into it enough that I would have more to say than a glowing report from a novice who doesn't know anything or who's kind of deer in headlights. So uh, I, like many people, was interested in martial arts for a long time. It's very obviously it has a big place in the media and in movies and television, and it's hard not to see that stuff and be impressed, even though at some level you kind of realize, well, this is a television, this is media. How much of this is true and how much of it's not? It's hard for a layperson to understand. I certainly would fall into that category, right? You'd watch a Steven Seagal movie or a Jet Li movie, or Bruce Lee, and it's hard to say, well, how much of this is real, how much of it is not. Certainly as a kid, I couldn't really tell the difference. Um, Thankfully, through YouTube, I had some subscribers who had a lot of experience, and I remember, oh, at this point now, back in 2012, 2013, one in particular, he was Polish, and he had done 20, 25 years of various different schools, karate, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, and whatnot. And he really advocated. He said, well, it sounds what you're looking for, and I was looking for something that would be effective in actual fighting. I wasn't too interested in doing something that was going to be about sports or points, even though there's certainly value for that, and there's reasons to value those kinds of experiences. He said, well, of course, there's more than one option. There are more than one effective fighting systems, but he highly recommended Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And actually, way back in 2013 or 2012, I did actually join a place that I only attended a few times before I moved. So I had the experience of going there and seeing how that place operated. Didn't get a really great experience just because of the limits of my time there. Moved to New Hampshire, and then for the first couple of years I was here, I was a little busy and just didn't get around to it. So finally, and I'm not exactly sure why, I decided to actually, kind of jump in, and I joined a place 2 years ago, and I've been averaging about 9 hours a week of mat time, plus a couple more. I have my own mats where I practice with, other people in the class. Um, and just to give some background here, it's very confusing jiu-jitsu because it's very strongly associated with one family. Now, there's certainly other families and lineages that are very important and totally legitimate, but obviously the Gracie family kind of dominates at least the perception of the art, and they're certainly extremely important, even if you don't want to take away anything from the other families that are out there. And it's a little confusing because it is a large family. We're talking about at this point 3 or 4 or 5 generations of these guys, this Brazilian family, and many of them have a lot of kids, and they have this tradition where the first names of everyone starts with an R, and many of them basically are trading on the name, not just the name. Like, they are actually skilled fighters and skilled innovators and entrepreneurs, and all that. I mean, they are more than just their name, but it is confusing for people because there are so many of them, and they all have first names that start with R. It seems that way. So for those of you who are curious, I probably went with a very standard option here. Um, I joined the Gracie University system, which is a little bit different than some of the other ones for reasons that we could go into here. It's run by Henner and Hirion Gracie. They are the grandsons of Grandmaster Helio Gracie and the sons of Grandmaster Horion Gracie. So they're based out of California. I believe that they were born in the States, although their fathers and grandfathers were from Brazil. And they run a very large system. I think there's something like 60,000 students. It's set up to be usable online. So there's videos and stuff. I actually joined a certified training center, so I have instructions from certified instructors. But again, very confusing because I believe the second largest jiu-jitsu operation in the country is run by Henzo Gracie, who is probably a cousin or a great second cousin or something like that. So it's that aspect of it is a little confusing, and there's so many of them. I don't know them all. So anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about what to expect and what not to expect. And one of the things I think that most people find very difficult is people don't have the patience to develop skill. This isn't just true with jiu-jitsu. This is true with almost anything. Whether and this is one of the rare times where my musical training was useful. So, some of you know I have a music degree that I do not use whatsoever. However, I think musical training was very valuable. Now, not as valuable as the amount that I paid for my diploma, and I didn't really need that diploma to learn how to play music. But one of the things about music is you spend a lot of time practicing. You don't spend a lot of time performing per se. I mean, you do performances, but as a fraction of your time, most of the time you spend practicing techniques. And it could be very, very simple techniques. Just a single note transition, a single note, a single scale, a single piece of music that you break down by measure, and that's a lot of time in a practice room and a lot of repetition and a lot of self-assessment and analysis. And when you're really polished and when you've spent hundreds or thousands of hours, then it's time to go and do a performance. And the thing is, when people watch you play, when lay people watch you perform music, they're all impressed and they think, oh, you must be so talented and you must have this natural gift. I mean, this is very, very common. But really, you've just had a couple years of hard work or more years of not so hard work, where there's more ways you can slice it. And with something like music, I think that a person who works an hour a day on whatever instrument you want to talk about, whether it's piano or trumpet or the drums, if you worked an hour a day, in 2 years, you would probably be able to play stuff that most people would find pretty impressive. Are you a professional at that point? No. Are you good enough that you're going to wow the crowds and be perform at Carnegie Hall? No, but you're going to be good enough that the average person is going to be impressed. And if you do 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, and you start going instead of 2 years but 5, 10, that's when you start talking about somebody who they might be able to make a living potentially, right? If you work at it very hard. And the thing about learning a martial art like jiu-jitsu is it's very similar to that. It's it's a very long process of learning technique after technique after technique. And the problem that most people have with either of these is that they don't have their time preference is too high. They are not willing to do something that's going to take potentially months or years to have rewards, however defined, right? Most people want to be able to sit down at a piano and play something cool right away. And most people come into a martial arts class, and let's say a jiu-jitsu class, and they want to learn how to do some exotic choke or to beat the crap out of somebody, and they want to learn it like right away. And unfortunately, that's just not how things work. So the system at the Gracie University, and it's a system that I like. There are definitely pros and cons to it, but the initial class is something called Gracie Combatives, and you have to spend it varies, but it's at least 80 hours of mat time, but it's more like it comes out to something like a year and a half. And for that first, they broke it down to 70 different techniques that they think are the most likely to be used or the most applicable in an average street fight. So this is not considering what if you fight somebody who is an MMA fighter. Okay, if you fight an MMA fighter and you took your Gracie Combatives class, you're in serious trouble, right? You're gonna have a skilled opponent. They're gonna be able to counter everything that you do pretty much. It's kind of designed for if you fight somebody who isn't a skilled opponent, somebody who's just a regular person, but maybe somebody who might be bigger than you, stronger than you, and what kind of are the most typical things that happen in a fight, right? Fights are not completely random events where anything can happen and there's an equal probability of any outcome. There's certain things that are likely to happen. There's certain positions you are likely to find yourself in, and having techniques or approaches on how to deal with them are very important. So like the very first lesson they teach everybody is something called a trap and roll. It's not something that's super flashy. It's not something that's an amazing knockout thing that's going to win a UFC tournament, but the idea is if somebody is on top of you in mount in a position where they can start pounding your face in, what can you do to get out of that position? And something where grab their arm, trap their leg, and roll, and all of a sudden now you're on top and they're on the bottom, right? Very simple. Well, not very simple. It takes practice, right? And so basically the whole course is divided into it's 70 techniques. It's not 70 classes. I think it's like 30 classes that in each class you like will learn two. And the thing is, for the first until you finish that class, you don't do any sparring, or the term used in jiu-jitsu is rolling, where you're actually going against somebody and fighting. You're just learning the technique. And most people, if you go once or twice a week, it can take a year and a half, sometimes 2 years to do it. I jumped in with 2 feet, so I was doing 9 hours a week, going to every single class. I paid for the unlimited plan, so I could go as much as they had classes. And it took me 9 months with a 2 month break where I was gone for work. So I did about as fast as you could do it in that program. And once that's done, once you're able to complete that class and demonstrate that you know all those techniques in a way that's kind of muscle memory on recall, that you can do them automatically and well, then they give you a belt. It's kind of called Combatives Belt, and it's basically just saying you know these basic techniques pretty well. Do you know them ambidextrously and against every single opponent? Maybe not. That's a whole other level, but you know them basically. And then from then you can go to what's called the master cycle, where there's something like 1,000 techniques. That takes more than a year to go through that whole cycle. And it usually takes people multiple rotations of that cycle to really get that stuff, because that's a lot of information. And in those classes, that's when you do actually start to spar. You actually do start to, quote, roll. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more difficult. And it's a whole other layer where it's not just the technique. You're learning how to stay calm, and how to, pace yourself, and how not to panic, and what works and what doesn't work under stress. I mean, everything, it does work. All these techniques are techniques that will work under stress, but it's a good way to find out which techniques work for you. So I just want to say it's very fascinating. When I first joined, it is true that things like size and age and strength, they all matter. These are all pertinent variables in a fight. There's absolutely no question about it. But it's also possible that technique can counter those to an extent. Now, the bigger the differential in the size and strength and age, the more skill there needs to be to counter that. But I remember, for instance, that there was a kid, basically like a 14-year-old kid in the class when I started, who I probably had 80 to 90 pounds on. And there's no question that if we got in a fight, he could seriously harm me. And if he really wanted to, he could kill me. He probably would have been able to systematically break my arms and then choke me unconscious, and then from that point do whatever he wanted, right? And we weren't able to spar, but when I did get to the point where I could spar after 9 months, I mean, one of the guys that I rolled with very early on was a 62-year-old man who, again, I probably have 70 to 80 pounds on, and he beat the shit out of me. I mean, not like in a mean way, not in like in a horrible way, but he completely dominated me. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't escape him. I couldn't attack him. I couldn't do anything. His technique was just too good. And I mean, I didn't actually have panic attacks, but I almost had panic attacks. Like, he would be on top of me, doing whatever he wanted. He would be being nice. He would be pulling his punches, so to speak. And I'm like, that should not, a guy who's 25, 30 years older than you and smaller than you shouldn't be able to do this. And this is a guy who's not like a black belt or this is just a regular guy who's been going to the classes for a couple of years longer than me. He had a blue belt at the time. He's now a purple belt, but he had blue belt at the time. So for those of you who don't know, the belt system is basically white. As soon as you join, you're a white belt. The first day you walk in, you're a white belt. In this system, which is a little bit different, once you pass the combatives class, you get a combatives belt, or also known as a technical blue belt. That it's not an actual blue belt. And that was one of the criticisms that were made of this program, and I think it was a fair one, is it used to be you could take this test where you demonstrated these abilities, and then they would just give you a blue belt. And the problem there is, like, maybe you know the techniques, but if you can't apply them in an actual role, is it really a blue belt? And this was debated, and it's kind of arbitrary how you want to define it, but I think they wisely decided, okay, we're not going to call this a blue belt anymore. We're going to call it a technical blue belt or a combatives belt, which, it's something, hey, you know these techniques, but it doesn't mean that you can necessarily apply them against an opponent. And so, but then the next belt is a blue belt, then a purple belt, then a brown belt, and then a black belt. And so, and there's a huge difference between like a blue belt who's a 1-year blue belt and a blue belt who's a 5-year blue belt, or a 6-year blue belt. So, one of the reasons I'm doing this now is after 2 years, I got my blue belt. It took 2 years. I was able to ask. They keep track on how long you do that. So I had, I think, like 350 hours of mat time in the gym. Plus, I had done some on my own. I'm not exactly sure how much, but it's probably in the 30 or 40 hour range of practice outside of class with other classmates. And so that's about what it took. And it took about 2 years, although I did have about 8 months where I was gone for work. And it's been a really, really fun and engaging thing. It's very intellectually challenging, but it's intellectual in the way that you're trying to think, you're trying to play chess as like you're getting choked. And there's definitely something of a, there's a lot to be said for being put under pressure, by feeling pressure, by feeling that you're under attack, because you are getting attacked basically, right? And learning how to control your fear, to stay calm, and to know what to do, how to get out of it, and how to turn the situation around potentially. And it's hard because the people that you're training with are also getting better, so it's not like, oh, I got better, so I can take. Well, they're going to get better too, and you're all going to push each other. You get very close to these people, very quickly. So, within a year, people were inviting me to Thanksgiving, to Christmas, because you're spending a lot of time and you're getting to know them in a kind of an intimate way. I mean, you fight them all the time. You know how they think, you know how they act, you know about their quirks, and they know about yours. Reading Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone this summer, I thought back on jiu-jitsu classes many times. At the time, I was at work, and so I couldn't go to jiu-jitsu, and reading that book about forming groups, getting to know people, doing things together. This definitely falls into that category. It's not a team sport per se, and I think that's one thing I'll kind of address real quick. So there's two kind of broad schools of thought in jiu-jitsu. There's sport jiu-jitsu, and then there's like fighting jiu-jitsu, and they're both wonderful. And there's things about sports jiu-jitsu that I'm sure there are practitioners who are very skilled at it who would beat the crap out of me, like whatever. But it's geared towards going to tournaments, winning tournaments, and in the tournaments there's a whole bunch of rules, and there's some new tournaments that are a little bit different. But basically, there's no striking, and so it's not like a real fight. And I remember one of the schools that I visited where they were doing the instruction, they were just saying stuff like, "Oh, if you hold a person like this, you should because you'll get more points by doing that, even though this would be a position where you would clearly get punched in the face by holding this position. But in a match, at a tournament, you won't get punched in the face because that's not in the rules." So that's cool. I mean, there's something very great about that. That's still it's still a challenge. It's still physically fit. You are still learning stuff that is applicable martial arts stuff for sure. But to me, that doesn't sit well with what I want. I want something that is actually going to work if I need it. Not that I want it to happen. I don't want to be in a fight. I don't want to get killed, or I don't want to test it in that way. But I want something that's going to work in that environment. So it just kind of struck me as a weird. I don't care about points. I want to be in a position where like I can survive an altercation if I have to. And so people should know that there's two kind of broad differences. One of the other things that's kind of different with the school that I went to, and this is a debatable point, but the delay in the rolling is unusual. Most schools will have you rolling like right away. And I must say that while that is fun and there is something good, like when you roll with someone and you're completely a novice, you do learn things. And it's not necessarily a bad experience, but you don't learn that much jujitsu in those cases because you don't know what you're doing. And this is what happened the first school that I joined years ago, which I only went to a couple of times. They would show a couple random techniques that, by the way, would very unlikely ever be applicable in a real fight. You're not going to do a funny ankle lock or reverse triangle in an average street fight or anything like that. And if you don't know anything, the first technique you learn should not be, a Darce choke or something like that. At least in my opinion. And not just my opinion. I'm of course parroting the opinion of my teachers, but fair enough. Um, they have the authority to speak that I don't. But then we would roll, and that was a lot of fun. But you didn't learn anything because you were just getting choked out and armbarred, and you just don't know what's going on. And what I like about the structure of the system that we have now is that I go to now is that before you even start to roll, you know at least 70 techniques pretty well, well enough that you can try and implement them anyway, and you go from there. Now you're still you're facing people who have probably a lot more, potentially years and years more experience. And so even though you know those 70 techniques, you're going to lose very often, which is humbling and good in its own way. But you don't to learn the techniques, you need to practice the techniques, right? This would be, to use the music analogy, you don't just give somebody an instrument and go perform. Like, okay, it's not like you won't learn anything by doing that, but it would make much sense to be like, okay, go to the practice room, practice these scales, practice these chords, practice these little snippets, and after you put in a lot of time, then go and perform. It doesn't make a ton of sense to just throw somebody in. Now, you can definitely debate how much, right? How long do you wait? Should you start rolling in 6 months or a year? Should you learn 50 techniques, or is just 10 enough? Fair questions, and obviously I think it's kind of silly to assume that there's a right answer for everybody. I think the people are going to learn at different rates, and it's totally plausible that person A might require, more time in practice before they start rolling than person B, and vice versa. And a school that's trying to standardize things certainly would have difficulty just saying, hey, everyone, this is your, if they want any kind of standard, they can't really do that. So they can kind of approximate what they think works for the most people or the median person or whatever. And I think that the system that I go to is okay in that. I think for me personally, I think maybe it's a little too long of a wait, but maybe not. It's not going to hurt someone in the long run. 2 years in, you will have had lots of time to roll. You'll have lots of time to learn other techniques, and it's going to be fine. So again, I find it's a very fun challenge. It's intellectually stimulating. It's physically stimulating, right? This is good cardio every time. The rolling is basically like high intensity interval training. You're going explosive, 100%. Then you're relaxing. Then you're doing it again. You're utilizing all your muscles. That started when I first started. It was weird. My abs started to hurt a lot, just because there's a lot of ab movements. There's a lot of things you do with your abs. This got me much more interested in my flexibility, and I've always been somewhat flexible. I'm a little stiff today, so that's not as good as I can normally do. But it got me much more conscious about things like body mobility and strength training, and then just learning the techniques and spending the time to rep them out and rep them out and rep them out and rep them out. And I just was practicing with one of my friends today, and we were working on something that we'd seen once, and we figured it out, and then we said, let's do it like 20 times each, and that's what we did. And it went from something that like we couldn't properly perform at first to something that probably can perform. And then the next time that we go to class and we're rolling with people, we're definitely going to try and see, does this work? And if it does work, then we know we've got it down. If it doesn't work, then we know, hey, we need to work on our technique a little bit better, or realize who it's applicable and who it's not. Obviously, there's techniques that work very well on somebody who is your size or smaller that may not work for somebody who's bigger, and it goes both ways. I mean, there's certain chokes where a smaller guy is actually harder to choke because their neck is smaller, and then there's other things that won't work on a bigger guy because he's bigger. And that's one of the nice things too, is you get to try, if you're in a class with enough people, you can try this stuff on all sizes, right? People who are smaller, people who are bigger, women, men, the whole gamut. And that's just, again, you don't want to get ahead of yourself and like, oh, I'm fucking Bangkok ready and UFC, watch out, here I come. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But the fact that, after you have 2 years, 3 years of training, when you're talking about that versus a person who's untrained or has minimal training, that's pretty good. And I remember I was talking to our instructor once, and I said, how many of the people who join the class actually get to the point, to that second year when they actually start to roll, where they get a technical blue belt? And he said it's like 8%, right? So the most people don't have the patience, or they get bored. Oh, I don't want to do these techniques. I don't want to practice this. Let's go back to the music. It would be like saying, I don't want to practice my scales. I don't want to practice my chords. I don't want to do these exercises, right? Music has lots of exercises, which is, they're not actually pieces, but they're just things that work on your articulation or your fingering. And they're not necessarily fun. I mean, you can get into them and focus on becoming good at them. But if you just say, I just want to skip all that and just go to the performance, well, you're just not going to get very good. And the thing is, again, people have too high of a time preference. People, not all people, there's people who do it for sure, but it's a minority. It's a minority. And the thing is, like after you've done it for a year or two, people start to be like, "Ooh, ah, that's amazing," right? And it's not amazing, right? I know enough to know that even the techniques I know are kind of sloppy and wouldn't work on everybody, and a lot of techniques I barely know at all. Like I kind of know what to do, but it's not perfect. But the more it's one of those things where the more you know, the more you realize your own ignorance. But to the layperson, it looks like you're fucking, black belt karate kid or whatever. And that's happened a couple times because like we'll be rolling and there'll be younger students who maybe a year or two behind who are just starting. I mean, younger as in they've been in the class longer, not necessarily age younger. And they'll be watching and they'll clap and they'll think it's amazing. And it's like, that was one of the crappiest, like, this would be a joke in the UFC, but to them, it looks amazing. Or, not all of them, some of them. So it's been a very rewarding experience, a very fun experience, something I definitely look forward to continuing. And something that, I'd recommend. A lot of people, again, have trepidations about taking that first step. And all I can say is I wish I had taken it much sooner, right? As soon as you start, you have to get through that period of learning stuff that doesn't seem like it's going to be directly, where's the killer move here? This is just kind of boring, but you just got to wade through that. That's something you have to, for any skill, you have to go through this period where it's very awkward. And I still, I watch new students now, and I'm like, I remember when I was like that. When I could, it's a new way to move. It's a new way to think about your body that you're not used to, especially if you're not particularly athletic, which I wasn't. I mean, I've been in shape for a couple of years, but I'd never played any sports, so I didn't have the kind of coordination that you might have if you've been a hockey player or a gymnast or a swimmer or something. And yeah, the first couple months, the first 6 months or whatever, it's kind of like you've got two left feet and you don't know what you're doing and you're constantly confused and you're constantly lost. And then you get to the point where like, oh, yeah, I think I kind of know what to expect and I sort of remember the movement a little bit and it's maybe not very polished and it's not precise, but you're kind of getting there. And then after 9 months, it's to the point where like, wow, okay, I'm click, click, I know exactly what to do and exactly what to expect. And you can perform it relatively well. So, yeah, I mean, people spend their times wishing for goals, and they'll spend 5 years saying, and it's the same thing with like getting fit. I mean, I know people who 5 years ago were saying, I wish I could get fit, and 5 years on, they're still saying that. And it's like, man, if you started working 5 years ago, who knows where you would be? And it's the same thing. Oh, I could never play an instrument. It's too hard. Well, fuck, dude, you could, if you started working on it, you could become pretty good in 5 years. Even if you're not doing 4 hours, you say an hour a day or hour every other day or something like that, you can make a lot of progress. And it's the same with this. And you can go from a mysterious thing that you watch a movie and it just seems like a magical, impossible superpower to something that you can actually learn and actually apply. And I think that that's a really empowering thing for people to do. So, if you have any questions, comments, if you guys are familiar with Jiu-Jitsu, feel free to critique everything that I said and say that where I'm wrong or where I messed up or where I need to look or any advice and anything. And I'll leave it there. All right. Have a good night, everyone.